All right, welcome back to Southeastern 14. We're here, episode 4 of House Summitt. Nathaniel, episode 4. We always like to repeat the episode number to know that we've made it this far. So we're up to 4 now, and obviously a lot to talk about. Our Lady Vols show here on Southeastern 14, our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe if you're finding this for the first time. If you're a Lady Vols fan, Tennessee fan, we have a lot of stuff. Obviously, we've already done 3 episodes of the show. But we have a lot of other Tennessee-related stuff, whether it's men's basketball, football, baseball. It's all there. But, of course, Nathaniel, we're here to talk Lady Vols and the SEC tournaments. Now, we didn't get all our picks right. Let's call it what it is.
No, we did not. We got the winner right, but, man, we missed on a lot of the early ones, that's for sure.
Yeah, we didn't do great on our pick 'em. Luckily, we didn't put any money on the line. So we didn't lose any money for it, but we did get to the championship game because we both had South Carolina and Tennessee playing in the championship. And of course, that is what happened. I guess we can just start with sort of overall thoughts of how they played in this tournament. I mean, certainly the win over LSU was significant. There's no other way to put it. I mean, it's a big win this time of year, especially. I mean, it's a big win for a lot of reasons. Confidence, tournament seeding, which we'll get into here in just a minute. And then to go into the game against South Carolina, you knew it was going to be an uphill climb no matter what. And that's kind of what happened. But overall, just your thoughts on the SEC tournament for the Lady Vols.
Yeah, overall, I think it was a very strong showing for the Lady Vols. Obviously, you want to win the title, but it was your first trip to the SEC tournament title game since 2015? Like
Yeah, it's been a while.
It longer than it should have, but still, you finally broke that streak and got there. And you did it with to me, just an incredible win. The win of the season so far for this team, and one of the better wins we've seen for the Lady Vols in the last couple seasons. Fighting back from down 17 in the second quarter to, I think we're down 14-13 at halftime as well, and came back and just that fire in the second half and the Lady Vols had it. It seemed like it was partially LSU's fault. I mean, they kind of lost the game almost as much as Lady Vols won, but I mean, at the same time, Lady Vols did enough did quite a bit actually to frustrate them on defense. LSU's offense just was not flowing, was not doing well in the second half, and that was due in large part to changes the Lady Vols made on defense. Doing some zone instead of doing full man-to-man the whole time. Like it was, it did enough to confuse and stymie the LSU offense for the Lady Vols to be able to come back in that game. And I guess kind of to go before that too, of course, Blake, Kentucky went on a run. It's the SEC tournament. So the Lady Wildcats, for some reason, just catch fire over the last couple of years in the SEC tournament. And so, of course, Lady Vols had to play them again for the second straight game.
Won as many games in the SEC tournament as they won in the regular season.
So, yeah, it's crazy. Them and Texas A&M both. Like, who would have guessed the two bottom seeds would have made it to the quarterfinals? Like, that was just unreal. And Texas A&M didn't look as good as Kentucky did. And I just, for whatever reason, that Kentucky team just catches fire. I look at that game as a game where Lady Vols should have won by more. It was their own fault they didn't, but they still won, and they still beat a team that was playing with immense confidence at that point. And you saw they were not turning down shots. That you could tell they were a little more tired than Lady Vols, but Kentucky was still shooting the ball again with extreme confidence in that game. And I even look at, and I know, again, I kind of brushed over a little bit the LSU win, but that win was just so incredible in the way they came back and won 69-67. Rakia Jackson, Jordan Horston just looked phenomenal in that game. Rakia is putting her last month or month and a half of the season is rivaling anything that's been done since Candace Parker. I mean, it's just, she's had a incredible end to this season as a Lady Vol, her first and possibly only one as a Lady Vol. But really looking at even the South Carolina game, Blake, I came away a little more encouraged in that one than I did the first time they played, because it wasn't just first quarter and then the gates blew up, and like they were in it and at halftime, like they were out rebounding South Carolina in the first half, and that's not something that I don't recall if South Carolina has been out rebounded this season. I'd be shocked if they had. But I mean, obviously they didn't finish out rebounding South Carolina, but the fact you out rebound them for the whole first half, and Dawn State made a point to tell her team, hey, they're giving more effort, they're out rebounding you. And obviously South Carolina was able to, really more so pull away in the fourth quarter. Like it was still a fairly close enough game in the third quarter.
And that's what they do, right? Like that's just that's what South Carolina does. Like they just
wear you down.
Yeah, they wear you down. They don't have to beat you all in one quarter. They
No.
just do it over, like, it's just overtime. And I
Right.
think that's just, like we said, in games where they are not just the overwhelmingly more talented team, which those games can get out of hand quickly. This is just like, I feel like this has like been their formula, is they just,
Mhm.
this is what they do. And it winds up being a 16-point game. You look and be like, we were right there. And like, but you still, like, you just lose by, like, that's just what they do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and again, no shame in losing them. No shame in losing
Yeah.
to like that either. Like I said, it was close in the first, second, and third. It really just got busted open in the fourth. And again, I just don't see a team beating them this year. I really don't. I mean, again, maybe something happens crazy in the Final Four or the championship game, but they just have that feel of some of the '90s Lady Vols teams or some of the 2000s or UConn teams where it just they seem unbeatable. It just seems like a miracle for a team to beat them. So again, no. So that's why I came away with feeling positive. Yes, Lady Vols lost, but they lost to the undisputed best team in the country, the reigning national champions, and a team that hasn't lost in like over a year at this point. Now, last time they lost was the SEC tournament championship last year, and they haven't lost since then. So it's been a full year since they've lost a game. But honestly, Blake, I came away pretty encouraged and thought Lady Vols had a pretty strong showing. I think this team's chemistry has finally, I think they've gelled together. I think the culture is kind of set in the right place. You look at someone like Rakia Jackson, who I think we mentioned this last show too, could very easily have quit the team, could very easily have, let the adversity of the early season affect her and step away, just fully step away and not come back. But she didn't. And now look at her. I mean, she's thriving, and that's putting it lightly. I mean, she's just having an incredible run right now. And then Jordan Horston, of course, continues to do Jordan Horston things and be the do-it-all player. You also look at, Tess Darby is a sharpshooter from three. I mean, she's been lights out from the three-point range lately. And you're getting some better guard play. Again, I think the Kentucky game, you saw some of those turnovers rear their ugly head, but you had turnovers better under control against LSU and South Carolina than you did against Kentucky. Again, I think guard play is stepping up some too, but I mean, this team just, I think they're playing better at the right time. Does that mean they get to the Elite Eight or Final Four? I don't know, but I think they can at least get to a Sweet 16, and we can go from there and see what happens. But I was pretty encouraged after the way the SEC tournament went.
Yeah. I don't know how you couldn't be. Like, I just think how it played out, because like we said, I mean, like, I had LSU losing. We both had LSU losing in the semis to or losing at some point. I just had them losing earlier. I went with Georgia. That didn't work out, but still,
it was the thought that counts.
It's good for Tennessee though, right? Because a win over LSU is better than a win over Georgia. So that was nice for Tennessee to have that opportunity. But yeah, I don't know how you can't come out of this feeling more optimistic heading into the NCAA tournament. And yeah, I mean, again, like you said, just a lot of good things I think that come out of it. And of course, that's a great way to segue into the NCAA tournament. Bracketology, another update here, because we do this. We've done this every week since we started this show. But where is Tennessee in the bracketology? And I know Nathaniel's got some thoughts on kind of the debate going on about where they should be. But VESPN, Charlie Krim here, updated on, let's see, it's going to be Monday night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern. So we're using this as the guide to chat here on Tuesday afternoon. So this is the updated edition. And Tennessee currently sitting at a 5 seed in the Villanova region, I guess you could say, not the region, but that part of the bracket. Villanova is the 4. Has Tennessee playing Toledo, the automatic qualifier, as the number 12 from the MAC. James Madison's the 13 is the automatic qualifier. That is in, again, the Seattle portion, where Virginia Tech is the 1 seed in Blacksburg. Not much has changed, I guess, Nathaniel, when you look at some of the other stuff. Now, one thing that is notable, LSU has moved down to a 3 seed. So that is at least interesting to note. If you want to know kind of where everyone else is at, obviously South Carolina's a 1, Indiana's a 1, Stanford's a 1, Virginia Tech's a 1. And the 2 seeds right now are Maryland, Iowa, Utah, and UConn has moved up to a 2, which we talked last time. UConn was at a 3. So I assume they probably replaced LSU perhaps in that scenario. I don't remember exactly where it was the last time we talked. But, of course, the bigger note here is that Tennessee is at a 5. And as we said, they've moved up a seed line every single time until now, Nathaniel. They didn't move up a seed line here, but They've kept moving up. When we started, 3 weeks ago, whatever, there were 7, moved to 6, now they're to 5. I mean, and then you mentioned before we started recording, the debate between is Tennessee a 5 or are they a 4, which we know the value of being a 4. That means, you're going to get a couple games in Knoxville. So it's an interesting debate. I think Tennessee's a great example of a team that certainly has, some losses in there. I mean, just the number itself can be a little intimidating when you look at it as 11 losses. But I think, as you and I have talked about before, I think when you consider who those losses are against, they're against a lot of teams that are ahead of them right now in terms of the seeding. And so that's something I think you consider. In all honesty, Nathaniel, I was thinking about this earlier, looking at it. It is pretty wild to look at when you just go down and look at some of the losses. But I think if you flip this one game recently, I think Tennessee's a 4 right now. And you want to know which game I'm thinking? I'm thinking a Mississippi State game. If they win that game, I think they're probably a 4 right now. But again, 4 or 5, it's not a huge difference seeding wise, but it is a difference in terms of getting a couple games on your home floor. So that's where Tennessee sits right now. I don't know that anything changes that. And remember, this is just one person's projection. So let's keep that in mind. We're not saying this is exactly where it is, but that's where they sit now. I don't know if anything, will change that heading in, if that is where people have them projected. But it is an interesting debate, whether they're a 4, whether they're a 5.
Yeah, and if you're a Lady Vols fan, you would love to have seen Villanova get bounced earlier in their tournament than they did, but they ended up playing UConn, and the final score, it was not quite as close as maybe the final score would have indicated. UConn had that game pretty well wrapped up, and then I think they only scored like 9 points in the fourth quarter, and Nova was able to trim it down to a more respectable, kind of the exact opposite of the way the Lady Vol and South Carolina game went, where it was closer throughout, and then the final score looked like it was a blowout. And the UConn game, it looked a little bit closer than it probably actually was in that game. I think you're right, though. I think if you win that Mississippi State game, you're sitting very close to a 4. Right now, the 4s, according, again, like you said, this is just Charlie Cream's projections, but right now he has it as North Carolina as a 4, Texas as a 4, where's the UCLA as a 4, and then of course Villanova as a 4, which he has Tennessee and Villanova matched up in that Seattle 3 bracket there. But that I will say that part of the bracket, the Seattle bracket's interesting. Virginia Tech as the 1 would be intriguing because Lady Vols, of course, have played them here the last few seasons. It seems like they've been playing them quite a bit. But then you also have in that little bracket below the Villanova and Tennessee bracket, middle MTSU as the 11, which there's been a lot of discussion this year about MTSU and Tennessee and why was MTSU ranked and Tennessee not, until finally here in the last week of the season, Lady Vols snuck into number 23. And then you also have LSU there as the 3. So like you've got a lot of interesting. Again, we'll see if that's how it pans out, but that would be an interesting bracket if it did pan out that way, Blake. But
yes,
I posed on Twitter, I think it was Sunday, not too long after the Lady Vols had fallen to South Carolina, and I said that, I think the Lady Vols, I think what we've seen is that they deserve to host. I think they should be a top 16 seed. And I get a lot, most people were saying, yes, I agree. Look at what they've done. They've played the toughest schedule in the country, and it looks like they're playing their best ball right now at the right time. But I had a surprising amount of pushback, not from like outside fan base, but really from inside the Tennessee fan base. I don't know if it was, people who like to fake that they're Lady Vol fans when it doesn't really seem like they actually are. They only tune in to, kind of complain and moan about things. But it was still surprising to me to say, seeing the amount of people, wasn't a ton, but still like seeing the amount of people I did say, why do you say that? Like, what's the resume? Why do they deserve the host and be a top 16 seed? And yes, I get it. Like there wasn't a huge quality win besides LSU until the LSU win. But you do look back at the early season schedule, they did get a key non-conference victory. Now I'm just struggling to remember who it was, but they did beat somebody who was good in the non-conference, and they have wins over some really, pretty solid net teams in the SEC, like Alabama and Georgia, for example. And of course, I mean, Florida was ranked higher than I expected them to be in the net, but 2 wins over them as well. Like they beat Ole Miss, and Ole Miss was a top 4 seed in the SEC and is a for sure NCAA tournament team. So like you have net, quad 1 and a very solid amount of quad 2 wins. Another thing is you don't have a bad loss. Like your worst loss
0.
is
Yeah.
your worst loss is I guess maybe that Mississippi State game would be your worst loss, but literally every other loss I think you've had has been to a team that is top 25 in the net. And a lot of them have been top 10, top 5, like to UConn, to South Carolina twice, to LSU once, to Stanford, to I'm struggling to remember who all they played, Ohio State. Like you've played so many good Colorado. That's the team they beat. That's actually a pretty solid team that they got a quality win over. I know it's the debate of, do you view no bad losses more than a lot of quality wins? But like, again, it's not like they don't have any quality wins. They have quality wins. And the LSU one's kind of the gem in your crown right now of look who we beat in March in a tournament setting. Because we talked about it last week. I said I feel like LSU gets a lot of home cooked whistles. Every team does, but I feel like they more than a lot of teams do. And I'd be very interested to see what happens if there's a rematch in a neutral site. And we saw like they didn't get as beneficial of a whistle in that game, and that was a big point. We saw many a meme about Kim Mulkey's reaction to the offensive foul call there at the end of that game. I don't think that call doesn't happen in Baton Rouge. That's a
I think we've had that discussion before.
No call. Yeah. So I mean, it's just I understand people, I guess, questioning, what have the Lady Vols done to host this year, and maybe I'll admit I'm probably being a little bit of a homer and looking at the history of the program and saying, maybe that is superseding some of the logic in my brain. But honestly, still though, it's not like their resume is garbage. They have a strong resume. Again, number one strength of schedule, and a lot of those games happened earlier in the year when this team was not, gelled together yet. Now they are, and they look like you compare this Lady Vol team, Blake, to what they looked like in December. It's a night and day difference. This team looks so much better than what they did back in December when they played a lot of these teams that are, in the top 10, top 5 of, not just the net, but of AP and just other rankings out there too.
Yeah. Well, you said something like the strength of schedule. I mean, we all know the NCAA tournament committee loves strength of schedule. Like they want to see you play teams that are in the field. And as you talked about, Tennessee has not done that. Like they have, my goodness, look at who they've played. And like I'm looking here, the average, this is from Warren Nolan. The average net of their wins is 95. Their average net of their teams they've lost to is 13. Think about that. Like that's because they have 11 losses, and the average net of the teams they've lost to is about 13. So they have played pretty much all the teams near the top. And I think when you consider that, of course, multiple games against South Carolina, that helps. But it's all the others too. It's the UConn, it's the Stanford, it's the Indiana, the Virginia Tech. I mean, go down the list. Like it's all those teams. LSU twice now. Yeah, like I don't know that there's anybody just from the metrics that has kind of that sort of profile that looks like that. And yes, as we always say, it is about winning games too. And like I said earlier, I think just having 11 losses from a visual standpoint, like they exist. You lost 11 games. But so I think that's the only thing that when you start to compare teams and you're looking at hosting and 4s and 5s and that's something that will be weighed. But I tell you, I would not be shocked if they wind up a 4, because I really look at it, and the more you look at just and we say this every year, right? And we've talked about this before on the men's side, but it's what do they value this year? Because I hate to say it, that changes year by year. They can say it,
right,
but it does. And what is the thing they value most? Because I think if it's looking at sort of the deeper numbers on Tennessee, and you take into account, again, picking up a win like they just picked up, which we always say too. You don't know exactly what's going to happen with what is valued in conference tournaments and all that. But I mean, I think they certainly have a case just when you look at the numbers. Now I know once again that games are played beyond metrics and all that, but not a single bad loss. They played about as tough of a schedule as you could possibly play. And I think you can be rewarded for that. And I feel like just by getting to the championship game and getting another very good signature win over LSU, I think that can possibly drive them into that 4 spot.
Yeah, I mean, like you just ran down. Like I was looking at their schedule again because it's just absurd. Their losses were from November through the month of December. Their losses were to Ohio State, who's really good and a top top 25 team this year. Indiana, who's been flirting with that one of the number 1 seeds. UCLA, who is a top 16 seed right now. Gonzaga, who's had an incredible season this year. They've had a really good season.
I think they're 8 seed at the moment.
Yeah, they beat Colorado, who's a solid team. Lost to Virginia Tech, who, as we just talked about, Charlie Cream has a number 1 seed, and they lost to Stanford, who again is a number 1 seed. Like that, there is no bad loss in there, and a lot of those games were close. And I didn't even mention it was at Ohio State. First of all, of course, Indiana was in Knoxville. UCLA was in Knoxville. Actually, were those? No, those were neutral site games. Pardon me.
Yeah,
UCLA and Gonzaga were. Virginia Tech was in Knoxville, and then the other one was at Stanford too. So 2 of those games were on the road. UConn was at home, and again, it's UConn. It was at South Carolina, and then your only other your worst loss, not worst, but your bad loss, I guess you could say, was a double overtime game on the road against a team that is like the borderline like bubble team. Like that's not that's not a bad loss. That's a loss against a desperate team in double overtime on the road. Like,
yeah. Like I'm pulling this up. Like, look at this. Just like look at the visual of this. And again, ignore like the result predictive stuff on the left side and the bottom there. Like, look at the strength of schedule at the top, the average net, and like Nathaniel, you were talking about. Like, look at 2, 3, and 4. There's not a lot of games there. Period. We talk about not having a bad loss. There's just not a lot of games there. Yeah. But look at 1. Like, look at how many games they played. Just and how many good teams.
Quad 1 games. Yeah. That's insane.
It's nuts. So again, I think it's very possible they can be rewarded for. I mean, that's what they tell you to do, right? When teams get left out, what's the first thing they tell you? They say schedule harder. Like, you do a tougher schedule. Your non-conference schedule helped you out or left you out. That they did everything you could possibly do.
I don't know they could have scheduled harder, Blake. I don't know that this year they could have.
It's not possible.
Again, some of that was, again, you have South Carolina in your conference, but like even without that, like the non-conference strength of the schedule on there was number 2. Like that's like it's impossible to me to think of unless you'd scheduled. I mean, you scheduled Stanford, you scheduled UConn, unless you'd scheduled Virginia Tech. I mean, God, you scheduled like outside of your own conference 3-4 teams that are going to be 1 or 2 seeds at the end of this. Like once we get to Selection Sunday, like that is ridiculous to think about. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We still have I think next week when we do this, it'll have been Selection Sunday, so we'll know where the Lady Vols are. By the time we record this next week. But I mean, I will understand if they're a 5 seed, but to me, I think I know I'm biased, but I think a 4 seed makes a lot of sense for them because you look at. Again, you mentioned like the 11 losses. That's going to kind of go, ooh, that's a lot of. Why is a team with double-digit losses a 4 seed? But I guarantee if you put their resume up against a North Carolina or a Villanova, for example, who are projected 4 seeds right now, Lady Vols' resume is going to compare favorably to theirs, and there's going to be some common opponents, at least in Villanova's sake, especially. But I mean, there's just I don't know. To me, I think this team is built for. I don't know, but an interesting run in March. It really is. It's going to depend on where they get matched up and which number 1 seed they get matched up with. Because if you're a 4 or 5, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, you're going to play the number 1 seed, sooner rather than later. So if they're in Virginia Tech, that will be interesting because Lady Vols have already played them once, and it wasn't like it was a blowout in that game. I think the final score, what was the final score? It ended up being, I'm losing it. Here we go. It was 59-56. That was a close game. I remember watching that one and that one being right there for the taking. And Jordan Horston had an incredible game, had 26 and 11 and I don't know how many assists and steals and blocks she had. But I mean, that would be interesting because that was probably the game, one of those games Lady Vols for sure could have and maybe even should have won. That ended up being a loss. That was one of them. And then the Gonzaga game was the other one I would circle that was, right there for the taking against a pretty high quality opponent. So we'll see, Blake. But I mean, if you're Virginia Tech's bracket in the Lady Vols, I mean, you got to like your chances playing against them on a neutral site, more so than obviously than a South Carolina, but more so than maybe a Stanford or someone like that as well.
Yeah. No, I think so. It's interesting, and like we talk about, if they make that jump, the 4s and the 5s right now, we mentioned Villanova, Texas and Louisville and Austin is another pairing. Remember, we're just doing one bracketology here. We're looking at one person's thoughts, but it is someone who is very good at this and better than us at this when it comes to probably trying to field an entire tournament. So Texas is a 4, Louisville's a 5, Carolina a 4, Colorado a 5, North Carolina that is, UCLA a 4, Oklahoma a 5. So you have to assume those are all the teams kind of in that same range. So yeah, we'll see. And again, I think it's who wins out in those 8 spots, like, and who winds up being the 4s and the 5s. It will all tell us what the committee, probably value the most in terms of looking at overall resume. So, but we will know that next week. And but Nathaniel, we have something else to cover before we wrap up, and that is the return of Tamari Key, and we've talked about her a couple times here, and just sort of looking into the future of the program and all that, and just just kind of sharing thoughts on kind of what's next for the Lady Vols even beyond the season. Well, what we do know is that she announced on what was that? It was Monday, Monday night, that she is going to be returning to Tennessee next season, and of course, obviously only played in 9 games this season. The blood clot issue and had to sort of step away, hasn't played since. And so, I mean, look, that's a big thing, right? Because again, we know the talent, and just to hear that she is going to return, we don't know the specifics on, when that means. She's still recovering when she returns to the floor. We have no idea. But the fact is she's coming back, and that's significant in and of itself. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, first of all, it's awesome that she's been medically cleared to do so, because this isn't like she's recovering from an injury. This is just like with Trey Smith and the football team for Tennessee, like the fact when he got medically cleared to return, it was a huge, sigh of relief and, kind of exaltation from Vol fans. I think it's been the same for Lady Vol fans. The explosion that I saw on social media from a lot of the Lady Vol fans I follow on Monday, on Facebook and stuff too. I mean, everyone was so happy that she was able to do this. Not just that she is doing it, but that she's able to do this. So first of all, that's incredible. Secondly, I mean, we talked last week. I said I think the game, or I guess 2 weeks ago, before the South Carolina game in the regular season, I said this is going to be a game where you miss Tamari Key the most. I don't think the Lady Vols upset South Carolina either of those games if they have Tamari Key, but I imagine it goes a little differently because you have a 6'6" post presence to go, to defend Boston, to defend Cardoso. So like you have someone who's their size and, has their skill set from a post perspective to defend them. You don't have that, right? I mean, Jillian Hollingshed's great. She's just not Tamari Key. And that's not a knock on Jillian. That's just, Tamari is who she is. So I think, to me, the way it has already changed my outlook for next season is I was fully expecting next season to kind of be a rebuilding year, or kind of maybe a bridge year, if you want to call it that, between what I think is going to hopefully end up being a very solid season this year to another great season potentially in 2024-25. But I think with Tamari Key returning, the next season has greater potential, especially, I mean, the defensive potential in the front court, Blake, is unreal. You have the versatility that Caroline Strickland brings as a forward, who she can hit threes, she can shoot shots from the elbow. She's got more of a versatile offensive game. She's not bad defensively. She's stronger on offense than to me than what Tamari can do from a shooting perspective. You also have Jillian Hollingshed, who really started to come on strong here over the last month of the season. I think it was the UConn game where she really started to played really well in that game, and has been more of a consistent offensive threat throughout the last month of the season. And she's not bad defensively. She can move well. She has long legs and is able to cover a lot of ground quickly. That front court, again, with even undersized players playing, at positions like Sarah Puckett, who's able to, I guess not technically undersized, but she's not as big as the other girls. You have a lot of versatility there in the front court. The big questions are still going to be, who do you have at point guard? What can you get from the guard play? I guess my biggest concern for next year, I think it's overall a definite net positive that Tamari Key's returning. I don't think you can deny that, in my opinion. My biggest concern is going to be, how does the offense change next year? Because I don't think Rickea Jackson and Jordan Horston return. I mean, they could return. The NIL gap is not as big, obviously, in the women's side as it is in the men's side, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. But I think you look at a place like Knoxville, and I mean, Lady Vols could, those athletes could be making a lot of money with NIL, more so than a lot of schools for women's basketball. UConn is an obvious exception. South Carolina probably is too. But like there aren't many schools that can compete with Tennessee and NIL, regardless of sport, but especially I think in women's basketball. So I think there's a chance they come back. I just don't think they will. But I think you look at, regardless of whether they do or not, what is the offense next year? Is it just going to be, dumping it down low and seeing what Tamari can do? Is it going to be so post oriented that it hinders driving to the basket, that it hinders the ability of more free flowing movement on the offensive side? Maybe it doesn't. I mean, maybe again, she's able to get it and she works on her passing out back to the perimeter, because if she gets doubled or triple teamed, I mean, that's going to leave someone like Tess Darby or Justine Passat wide open for threes, or someone else there for a mid-range jumper open to shoot a shot. Again, if you don't have a Rakia or Jordan Horston, it's going to worry me a little bit of who's taking those shots. But I mean, again, the transfer portal is wide open. We've seen it last year. Lady Vols took huge advantage of it. LSU took a lot of advantage of it too. I fully expect, obviously, with them not bringing in a recruit right now in this class, Lady Vols are going to have to, be very active in the transfer portal. But I mean, that's my only concern is, what changes with the offense next year? Does the offense become less dynamic than it has been this season because of that? But defensively, I mean, that's been kind of the issue with this team this year, is that they've allowed more cuts to the basket, more inside scoring than they have in previous years, and have not been as stout defensively in previous years. They've still been very good rebounding, but I think obviously next year, rebounding and defense, I'm not that worried about. It's going to be, what changes and how does the offense adapt. But overall, again, like I said, I think it's definitely a big net positive for Tamari returning. And I think it's got a lot of fans excited. I've already seen, again, a ton of, excitement, a ton of people saying, I already can't wait for next season. Already excited for next season because she's returning.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, it's for starters, it's just that she's cleared to have that opportunity, and that's the biggest part. And yeah, I mean, it will be very interesting to see kind of what the roster looks like, because transfer portal has become such a huge part of things. And so I always say, if you can't navigate the transfer portal, you're getting left behind in this era, right? Like, it's just, that's the way it works. And so you don't have to go the route you used to in terms of just rebuilding your team each season. And so, yeah, it will be a lot of fun, I think, to see. And obviously a strong finish, even if you don't have two key players that are helping you to that strong finish, will at least propel you to continue to attract more top talent. And obviously, just with the tradition of the program, that's gonna work, in your favor all the time, pretty much. But you can still, winning helps. And so it's been a nice way, I think, for them to continue to build kind of moving forward. So but that, Nathaniel, is sort of the biggest things looking at the Lady Vols this week. Of course, we'll have a lot more. Like, this is kind of the lull before, it's the calm before the storm. So we will know, we'll be able to break it all down next week in terms of looking at the bracket, seeing, the potential path and everything that's there. And that will obviously be a lot of fun. Anything else, Nathaniel, before we wrap up and get ready to jump into just waiting to see what the bracket's going to look like for the Lady Vols?
I say no, I don't think so. I think next week is going to be fun, because we'll have the full in-depth analysis of who the Lady Vols are matched up with, how that bracket looks, and everything. And I think the more years we get into women's basketball, the more parity we're seeing. It's just been they're behind the men's game because there wasn't it wasn't funded and developed as much as the men's game over the years. And now I think we're really starting to see more parity and more upsets happening in March for the women's side. So I think, we are truly in March Madness for not just the men's side, but for the women's side. I think last year Lady Vols had get taken to the wire by Belmont. Like, that was not a fun game if you're a Lady Vol fan sitting there. I mean, it was by the result, but like, you were chewing your nails and thinking, oh no, like, please don't, please let this happen. It's going to be fun, I think, again this year. There are a lot of mid-majors. I mean, MTSU, we just mentioned them. I think they're a very good team. I think they're ripe for a potential, upset of whoever they play. So there's going to be some mid-majors, smaller schools out there that I think, a lot of casual fans probably don't even know or care about. They're going to go out there and wreck some brackets for those of you who are doing the women's bracketology. So yeah, next week's going to be fun, Blake. I think it'll be a lot of discussion and a lot of analysis, just getting into the nitty gritty of matchups.
Yeah, no, should be fun, and we will have it all covered. So be sure to hit that subscribe button again, you can see all the other stuff we have here on the channel. Men's basketball, of course, in full swing as we get ready for that this week in Nashville for the SEC men's tournament. And yeah, lots of stuff there. Of course, football, baseball. Pretty sure Tennessee's good at all those, Nathaniel. So if you're just joining via the Lady Vols, we got a lot of other stuff here on the channel that you can check out. And so hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. That helps us out. And yes, we will be back next week with another episode of House Summit.